Rowaida, thank you so much for your time. There are unconfirmed reports that the Houthis have now arrived in Riyadh. We're waiting for official confirmation. How encouraged or otherwise, possibly even cynical, are you about the Houthis being there in Saudi Arabia?
Like you mentioned earlier, there are so many parties that are invested in this conflict outside of Riyadh, and those in Iran. The United States and others are keeping a very close eye. Like you mentioned, Yemen has been in crisis since 2014, and what the UN has called one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. To put that into perspective, we're talking about 20 million people who are in need of some sort of food assistance. Half of Yemen's children are acutely malnutritioned, as well as about 3 million pregnant or nursing women. And the numbers go on, the nearly 400,000 deaths. So there is a lot at stake here when it comes to these brokered conversations. Now, many people have mentioned optimism. They are hopeful that something will break through out of this decade-long conflict that will finally bring relief and reprieve to the most vulnerable groups inside the country.
What sort of concessions do you think have to be made from both sides before peace can even be considered, let alone delivered?
Well, the Houthis have gone in and they have their list of demands talking about reopening and controlling of Sanaa's airport, among other things. We know that Saudi Arabia also has their own thoughts in hand, and some are skeptical if they are going to be willing to give over so much concessions and power. And of course, you have the US that's carefully watching from afar. So many parties here have their own thoughts, their own agendas, and things that they want to accomplish. Now, will everyone get what they want? Most people are skeptical and are unsure if that's what it's going to take. Now, it is important to notice that these conversations, it could be a milestone. It's been so long for a ceasefire. The last ceasefire that was broken by the UN last October has expired. And so I think when we're discussing what that may look like in the milestones and perhaps the ambitions of all those invested, I think the Yemeni people in particular are hopeful. They have mentioned some sort of very small, very cautious optimism in hopes that these talks, if not, will lead to full peace, but at least give them some sort of relief from the decades and the waves of violence.
Rowaida, you mentioned the Yemeni people. Do we know if the Yemeni people, the majority of them, have actually taken sides in this war, or are they mostly caught in the middle and just want it to end and don't really care if there's a winner or not?
It's exactly that. The majority of the Yemeni people that I have spoken to are just looking to survive. They want to be able to bring food home onto the table and not worry about their children dying of the most basic needs, whether that's diseases that have been largely cured like cholera or acute malnutrition, or having concerns of their water being contaminated. Women are giving birth in hospitals that could be destroyed by bombs. Now, who are these bombs coming from? They're not debating that, but they're debating that the fact that the safe havens, like the hospitals, like the clinics, like the mosques, like the schools, are not even protected. The majority of Yemenis are trying to flee, but where are they to go with the lack of visas and passports and their own embassies not being entirely functioning? And so when we're describing the impact of this war, it is purely humanitarian. It is purely a need to survive, to raise children, to gain food, to go back to school. Now, Yemen, before the conflict, was already in a very acute position, was already facing levels of violence, pure humanitarian, social services concerns of food and clean water and the right to go to school, etc. And so the decades of violence of this particular conflict has only exacerbated that. And the Yemeni people are looking for a relief. They're looking for a final breakthrough so that they can go back to a life what they once called somewhat normal.
Rowaida Abdelaziz, thank you so much for the contribution. Appreciate it.